The Questionti sun was just beginning to rise over a quiet village in southern India. Light spilled through open windows and danced across the walls of a small classroom where a man sat silently at a wooden desk. His eyes were closed, his hands folded neatly on his lap. Sundar Pichai had returned to India not for a press conference, not for an award, but for something else, something personal. For weeks, he had been searching for peace. Success, fame, and billions of users had not given him the answers he now sought. It was not about technology anymore. It was about something deeper. Something he had lost. The village school was old, the walls were cracked, and the roof groaned. In the morning heat, but children came, barefoot and smiling, holding tattered books and hearts full of hope. Sundar had asked to visit without media. No cameras, no suits, just him and them. As the bell rang, children poured into the room. One little girl stood apart. She was about 7, with a red ribbon in her hair and eyes too serious for her age. Her name was Meera. When Sundar asked the children what they wanted to be when they grew up, the answers were loud and proud. A doctor, a pilot, a teacher. But Meera raised her hand slowly. The room fell silent. "Sir," she said, "do you believe in God?" Everyone turned to look at her. Sundar froze. It was the kind of question you expect in temples. Maybe on lonely nights, but not from a child in a dusty classroom. He smiled gently. "Why do you ask?" Meera looked down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because ... My papa is gone. Mama cries every night. I pray to God, but he doesn't answer. I want to know if someone like you, someone so smart, still believes. The room went quiet. Sundar felt something stir inside him. He hadn't thought about God in years. His life had become a series of flights, meetings, and metrics. But here was a little girl, broken and brave, asking him a question that echoed louder than anything he had faced at Google. He walked to her and knelt down. "Meera," he said softly, "I used to believe. Then I got busy. I stopped asking the big questions. I stopped listening." She looked at him, hopeful. "But can you find him again?" He looked around at the children. He could feel the weight of their silent prayers, the kind that never made headlines but mattered more than anything else. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe you can help me." The class gasped. "How?" she asked. Sundar stood up. "I'm going to stay here for a while. We'll look together." That night, Sundar stayed in the village. He refused the hotel in the city. He slept on a thin mat in the school, listening to the sound of crickets and distant thunder. In the darkness, he thought about Meera's words. The next morning, he began to help at the school. He taught the children about science, told them stories, played games. But every evening, he and Meera sat under the banyan tree and talked. One evening, she brought an old diary. "This was Papa's," she said. "He wrote letters to God." Sundar opened it. The pages were filled with pain and hope. One entry caught his eye. "Dear God, if I leave before Meera grows up, tell her not to stop asking questions. Tell her the world needs more wonder." Sundar's hands trembled. He looked at Meera. "Did you read this?" She nodded. "I don't understand all the words, but I think he wanted me to find something." "He did," Sundar whispered. From that moment, Sundar made a promise. Not just to her, but to himself. He would find God, or whatever truth lay beyond success in science. He would follow the questions of a little girl who had lost too much, too soon. But the journey would not be easy. 3 days later, a man arrived in the village. He wore a suit and dark sunglasses. He said he was from the government. He said Sundar was needed back in Delhi urgently. Sundar refused. But the man didn't leave. Late that night, as Sundar walked alone by the river, he saw a shadow move behind him. Then another. He turned, but no one was there. He returned to the school, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But something felt wrong. At dawn, the diary was missing, and Meera was gone. The search sky was still a deep shade of indigo when Sundar jolted awake. Outside the schoolhouse, the first faint light of dawn had barely touched the trees. Silence hung thick in the air, unnatural, like something had been ripped from the world. He sat up quickly, heart pounding, eyes searching the small, dim room. Meera's mat was empty. The diary was gone. For a long moment, he simply stared at the space where she had slept. It didn't make sense. She had been there last night. They had shared a quiet moment under the stars, reading her father's words. She had laughed softly when he told her a silly story from his school days. There had been no hint that anything was wrong, no warning, just warmth, trust, and the fragile bond forming between a girl searching for God and a man who had forgotten how to believe. He rushed to the door, flung it open. The schoolyard was empty. The banyan tree swayed gently. In the breeze, its thick roots holding firm to the earth, its leaves whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He ran to the tree anyway, hoping she'd be sitting there with the diary in her lap, eyes wide with another question that would shake him to his core. But she wasn't. He called out her name once, then again. No answer. By sunrise, the village had woken up. Farmers passed by with oxen. Children headed to the market. Women carried water from the well. Sundar moved among them like a ghost, asking each one the same thing. Have you seen Meera? They shook their heads. Most looked surprised. Some whispered to each other after he walked away. It wasn't long before he found the headmistress of the school, an older woman with kind eyes and deep worry lines carved into her forehead. She never misses a morning, she said, her voice trembling, not even when she had a fever last month. Something is wrong. Sundar nodded slowly. The air felt heavier now. He told her about the man in the suit. How he'd come days earlier, claiming to represent the government. How he insisted Sundar was needed in Delhi. How he refused to leave. How that very night, shadows had followed him. The headmistress went pale. They didn't take her because of you, did they? He didn't answer. He didn't know, but something inside him twisted. For all his brilliance in technology, for all the machines he had helped build to connect the world, he had no way to track a missing little girl in a rural village. He had no tools here. Only his mind and his heart, which now felt like it was being crushed by the weight of something he couldn't yet name. Later that day, he searched the surrounding areas. He followed a narrow dirt path through the fields, hoping it might lead to her home. What he found was a one-room hut with broken shutters and a quiet sadness hanging in the air. A single quotes as mother sat by a small fire outside. Her face was thin, her eyes hollow, as if sleep had forgotten her long ago. When she saw Sundar, she didn't look surprised. Just tired. Tired in the way only those who have buried their hope truly are. She's gone, isn't she? She asked. Quietly, he knelt beside her. Do you know where she might have gone? Did she say anything? Did she ever leave like this before? The woman shook her head. No. She was scared to go far. Since her papa died, she wouldn't even go to the edge of the village without someone holding her hand. Then she pulled something from her shawl. It was a folded piece of paper. She left this. Sundar took it, unfolded it slowly, and read the shaky handwriting. Dear Sundar, sir, don't be mad. I have to go find him myself. I need to know if God is real. And if he is, I want to ask him why he didn't save Papa. I think I know where he is. Please don't come after me. But if you do, follow the river. His hands trembled as he read. The last line again. I follow the river. The woman began to cry. Silent. Slow tears. Sundar stood up. The sun was climbing high now, but he didn't feel its warmth. He looked toward the horizon, where the river curved around the hills like a silver thread. He started walking. The river was both beautiful and dangerous. Its banks shifted from gentle curves to steep drops. Its waters glittered deceptively under the sunlight. Sundar moved quickly, calling her name every now and then, hoping she'd appear around the next bend. He passed old shrines, forgotten. Bridges and ruins swallowed by vines. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. No people, no signs. Just the sound of water, wind, and the steady beat of his own heart. Louder now with every step. He had no food, no phone. He had left all of it behind. It felt right. As if this was something he needed to do, not as a CEO, not as a global figure, but as a man. A man chasing after a child who still believed there were answers in the silence. The sun began to lower. He had walked for hours. Just as his legs began to falter, he saw it. A small figure sitting near the edge of the river, her feet dangling just above the water, her hair blowing in the wind. Mee air. He almost cried. He ran. She turned slowly. As he approached, her eyes wide, not with fear, but something deeper, something like sorrow. I told you not to come, she said softly. And I told you I wouldn't stop looking, he replied, kneeling beside her. She didn't say anything for a while. They just sat together, the sound of the river between them. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. I thought if I followed the river, it would take me somewhere special. Somewhere God would be waiting. He looked at her face, young but filled with a kind of ancient ache. And did you find him? She nodded slowly. I think maybe God is not a person. Maybe God is the way the wind feels when you're crying. Or the way someone comes looking for you even when you say not to. He blinked. It wasn't what he expected. It was more asterisk. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, coloring the sky in gold and fire. Then a distant sound broke the stillness. Footsteps. Many of them. They turned. Several men were approaching, fast, from the direction Sundar had come. They wore dark clothes. Some had walkie-talkies. One of them carried a black case. Sundar stood up, shielding Meera behind him. Who are you? He asked, voice steady. The tallest man stepped forward. You shouldn't have left the village, he said. This is not a safe area. You follow me. We're here to help, but we need to talk. Privately. Meera grabbed Sundar's hand. He squeezed it gently, keeping his eyes on the men. What's in the case? He asked. No one answered. Then the wind changed. And from far downriver, they heard something else. A cried out a voice. Not human. Something. Calling. And suddenly everything went still. The voice beyond the river for several seconds. No one moved. Sundar stood frozen beside Meera, her small hand still gripping his. The sound echoing across the riverbank like something ancient and untamed. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal either. It was something in between, like the cry of a wounded soul carried by wind and water. It didn't repeat. It didn't explain itself. But it changed the air. The men in black stiffened. The one holding the case lowered it slowly to the ground, glancing toward the forest behind them. Their faces, once hard and composed, now looked uncertain. Sundar saw it in their eyes. Fear. Not the kind that comes from danger you can see, but the kind that rises from what you don't understand. The tall man spoke again, quieter now. We shouldn't be here. Sundar took a step forward. Then why are you? The man hesitated, eyes flickering toward Meera. We were instructed to make sure you return to Delhi. Your presence here, it complicates things. Complicates. What? He didn't answer. Sundar's voice rose slightly, firmer now. What's in the case? The man opened it without a word. Inside, nestled in dark foam, was a slim tablet-like device with blinking blue lights and an antenna. It looked advanced military grade. Definitely not something you'd expect in a remote Indian village. Meera peered over Sundar's shoulder. What is that? The man hesitated. We call it a resonance tracker. It picks up low-frequency sound waves below what humans can hear. It's designed to detect underground activity, communication signals, geological shifts. And why? Bring it here? Sundar asked. The man finally looked him in the eye. Because this area is not ordinary. And neither is the girl. The words struck like a blow. Sundar stepped in front of Meera. What do you mean? The man closed the case. Again. A month ago, during a government satellite scan of the region, we picked up something strange. A cluster of signals pulsing from beneath this forest, close to the river. They weren't electronic. They were rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And they stopped the night Meera's father died. Meera went pale. After his death, the man continued, those same signals started again, but weaker. And they moved. Like they were looking for something. Sundar's thoughts raced. Are you saying the signals are connected to her? Man looked at Meera, then back at Sundar. We're saying something is, and we believe she can hear it. Sundar crouched beside Meera. Meera, when you came here by yourself, did you hear anything? She nodded slowly. Not with my ears. It was like something inside me was pulling. Like I was walking toward something that already knew me. He didn't understand it, not completely, but he believed her. Because there was something in her voice that wasn't invention or imagination. It was truth, and then the sound came again. This time louder. Longer dot, not a cry, dot a hum dot low, trembling. Like the earth itself was singing. The device in the case lit up dot, one of the men shouted. It's moving. They all turned toward the forest edge where the trees bent slightly forward, as if bowing to something unseen. The hum grew louder. Sundar stood protectively in front of Meera. What is that? The tall man didn't answer. He pulled a small radio from his belt and spoke quickly in a language Sundar didn't recognize. Static answered him. No signal, he muttered. Meera stepped out from behind Sundar. It wants me to come. He turned quickly. No, it could be dangerous. She looked up at him with eyes far too wise. I think God lives in the place where people are afraid to look. Maybe that's why no one's ever found him. The men began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to retreat, others to follow the signal. Sundar ignored them. He was focused on her. Meera, he said quietly. Are you sure? She nodded. I feel it. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. He had spent most of his life solving problems with logic, but this wasn't about logic. It was about faith. Not the kind taught in temples or whispered through rituals, but the raw, unexplainable kind. The kind that led little girls into forests and brought grown men to their knees. He took her hand again. Then we go together. The trees closed around them like a curtain. Tall, dark, and ancient, they seemed to pulse gently in the dim light. The hum faded as they walked, but the pull remained like a thread in their chests, guiding them deeper into the forest. The soldiers followed at a distance, their tension thick. Birds stopped singing. Even the insects were quiet. Time stretched. Shadows grew eventually. They came to a clearing. At its center stood a stone structure, half buried in vines and moss. It looked like a temple, but not one Sundar had ever seen. The walls were carved with symbols that moved slightly when you looked away and looked back. There was no door, only a narrow opening like a crack in a cave. The men behind them hesitated. One raised his weapon. Lower it, Sundar said. This is not a place for fear. He led Meera forward as they stepped into the narrow passage. The world behind them fell silent inside. It was dark but not pitch black. A faint blue glow lit the way ahead, emanating from the walls themselves. They moved slowly, deeper into the temple. Air stopped suddenly. I hear it again. The hum? Sundar asked. She shook her head. No, a voice, soft, like Papa used to speak when he thought I was asleep. A few steps more, and they reached a circular chamber. In the center was a shallow pool of water. Still and glowing on the far wall, a carving stood out among the rest. A man tall with open hands. And no face. Meera stepped closer. Then something extraordinary happened. Her locket, the one she always wore, the only thing left from her father, began to glow. A beam of light stretched from it to the carving, and then the water shimmered. Sundar stared as images formed on its surface. Not images of gods. But memories. Meera single quotes past father, holding her hand at the river. Writing in the diary. Crying alone under the banyan tree, laughing as he lifted her in his arms. Sundar couldn't move. The images shifted. And then they showed him. Sundar. As a boy, sitting under a tree, asking questions no one could answer. Staring at the stars, wondering if anyone was listening. The water was showing not God. But memory. The kind buried so deep. It became part of the soul. Meera turned to him. Maybe this is God, not a person, but the place where all love goes and waits to be remembered. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His eyes burned with tears. He hadn't let fall in years. And then a voice, not from outside. But inside. Both of them. Soft. Gentle. Double quotes. You are not lost. And with those 3 words, Sundar felt something break inside him. Not in a painful way, but like a shell finally cracking to let light in. They stood there, hand in hand as the voice faded. But just as the silence returned, a sudden tremor shook. The temple. The pool rippled. The carvings dimmed. And from outside, shouting. His soldiers were calling their names, but there was no way back. The entrance had collapsed. That they were trapped. The chamber of stillness for a long time. They didn't speak. Sundar and Meera stood shoulder to shoulder in the silent chamber as the dust settled around them. Small stones clinked and tumbled from above, echoing faintly as the entrance sealed itself behind them. It wasn't violent, and it didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate, like the temple itself had decided they weren't supposed to leave yet. The soldiers' voices outside grew distant, muffled by the stone wall that now separated 2 worlds. One world, frantic and explainable. The other, silent and filled with something you could not name without losing part of yourself. Sundar's heart thudded slowly. Not with panic, but with something he hadn't felt in years. Reverence. He looked down at Meera, who stood staring at the still pool of light, her expression unreadable. The images had faded now, leaving the surface glassy and calm, as if the memories had been returned to where they'd come from. He whispered, "Are you afraid?" Meera shook her head. "No, it's quiet in here, but not the scary kind. It feels like everything is listening." Sundar took a deep breath. The air in the chamber was cool and dry, ancient. It smelled of stone and time, not decay. There was no fear in it, no sense of danger. Only stillness. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, he stopped thinking about the world outside. The meetings, the deadlines, the weight of expectations. Here, none of that mattered. They were inside something sacred. He moved slowly around the chamber, his fingers grazing the walls. The carvings pulsed faintly under his touch, not with light, but with warmth, like the skin of something alive resting beneath the rock. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen in all his travels. They weren't language, not in a traditional sense, but they felt like they had meaning if only one could listen. The right way? He turned back to the pool. Why do you think it showed us memories? Meera sat cross-legged on the ground. Because that's where the truth lives. In the things we carry when no one else is looking. Her words pierced him. She was right. Sundar sat beside her. I used to ask so many questions when I was your age. I wanted to know why the stars moved, why people lied, why some people had everything and others had nothing. And most of all, why God stayed silent. Meera looked at him. What did you learn? He gave a small, bitter smile. I learned how to stop asking. I learned how to make sense of things with numbers instead of wonder. And the more successful I became, the less I remembered how to feel awe. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Maybe that's why you had to come back, she whispered, so you could feel small again. The silence between them deepened, not empty, but full of quiet understanding. Then, slowly, something changed. The walls began to glow, not brightly, softly, as if the chamber was exhaling. The carvings lifted faintly off the stone, like mist rising from water. And from beneath the pool, a sound emerged. Not a voice, not music. Something in between, like language. That didn't need words. Sundar closed his eyes. The sound moved through him like a current. Not just in his ears, but in his bones, in his memories, in the quiet corners of his childhood. He had long forgotten, and suddenly he was there again, standing outside his childhood home. His mother calling him in from the rain. His father placing a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You must always ask questions, Sundar, even when the answers hurt." The image dissolved, replaced by another himself, much older, sitting alone in a glass office, staring out over a city that never slept. Surrounded by screens, but untouched by any of them. He saw his own face in the reflection. Not tired, but Lost dot, and then one more memory dot, a hallway dot, bright dot, a hospital bed dot, his mother's final words. When the body fades, the soul listens better. He opened his eyes, dot, Emmy ear was crying dot, but she wasn't afraid. She was glowing dot, the light from the carvings now flowed gently across the floor, touching her fingertips, wrapping around her locket. Her father's voice somehow was part of the sound. Not speaking, not saying anything clear, but present, like a breath in the wind. He's not gone, she whispered. He's just dot, dot, dot. Waiting. Sundar felt his throat tighten. Meera's locket rose slightly from her chest, suspended in the air by the light. The hum of the chamber deepened. Something was building dot, then the pool began to move again. This time, it didn't show memories dot, it showed a path dot, underground dot, through rock and roots, toward something glowing far beneath. The surface dot, a doorway dot made of stone and fire. The chamber's light dimmed again, and a single sentence echoed through both of their minds, not in a voice, but like a thought they hadn't thought themselves. You may turn back now, or you may step through. But to step forward means leaving behind the world as you knew it. Meera looked at Sundar dot. He nodded once. They stepped into the pool dot, but the water did not take them. Down dot, it took them in. They did not fall, they moved, like light across glass dot, no gravity dot, no air dot, just warmth and pressure. Like being held in the palm of something enormous and gentle. They passed through layers of earth that shimmered with energy dot, and then just as suddenly they were standing again. New chamber dot, vast dot, round dot, no walls dot, only sky above them. Though they were deep underground dot, the stars were different here dot, closer dot, stranger dot, and in the center of the chamber, a figure, not a man, not a woman, not a body, a shape of light, ever dot, shifting dot, and when it spoke, they both wept, not because it was beautiful, but because it was familiar dot, like hearing your own name spoken for the very first time. I am not God, the figure said, but I remember him. Sundar's legs gave way. He dropped to his knees dot, did not. She walked forward dot, closer to the figure dot, and asked in the quietest voice, did he hear me? When I cried for Papa? The figure turned toward her dot, light pulsed. Every cry is heard. Some are simply answered in silence. Meera nodded slowly dot, and then, for the first time since she lost her father, she smiled. But behind them, the stone began to crack. A new sound. Roar dot, something was coming. Something not part of the light. And it wanted an asterisk. The darkness that follows light, the roar, began as a whisper. A trembling beneath the ground that made the chamber's still air shift and quiver. It did not belong to the warmth, nor to the soft glowing sky above them. It was something else. Something colder, heavier, ancient in a different way. Not timeless like the stars above, but bound by anger, by abandonment, by loss. Sundar pushed himself off the floor, his legs still weak beneath him. He could feel it now, something pressing at the edges of the sanctuary, clawing to get in. It wasn't wind and it wasn't sound, but it had weight. It moved like a memory you've tried to forget for too long. And it brought with it the sense of something broken, something that used to be whole. The figure of light, still at the center of the chamber, turned slowly. Its brightness dimmed, as if acknowledging the approach of something it could not stop. It didn't seem afraid, but it did seem sad. Meera stood perfectly still. Not because she was frozen in fear, but because she was listening, deeply, fully, as if tuning herself to something just beyond reach. Sundar stepped toward her. We have to move, now. She shook her head, eyes still locked on the light. We can't run from it. The roar grew louder, then cracks split the edge of the chamber, like lightning strikes across stone. Light from above flickered then, began to dim. Something was entering, not with steps, but with presence. A slow, devouring shadow, spilling across the ground like water, but thicker, like smoke soaked in sorrow. It did not take shape. It was shape itself. F-O-R-M-O-E-S. But heavy with feeling. It didn't speak. But Sundar felt its message in his bones. You came here to remember. But there are things better left forgotten. He clenched his fists. What are you? No answer. Only the hum of sorrow thickening like fog around them. The figure of light began to retreat toward the chamber's edge. Its glow growing thinner. For all its beauty, it seemed unable to stand against this dark wave. .mee. Ara turned to the shadow, and she did what no one expected. She stepped into it. Sundar cried out, reaching for her, but her hand slipped from his fingers like mist. She turned. Back once, her face calm, trust me. And then she was gone, swallowed into the shifting, dark. Time unraveled. Inside the shadow. There was no ground, no direction, no body. Only feeling. Meera drifted through it, unafraid, letting it press against her, move through her, try to whisper lies. But she didn't run. She listened. Deep inside. There was no monster, no demon. There was only grief. Enormous, wordless grief. It wasn't just hers. It belonged to thousands. Millions. Every soul who were asked, why? Why death came too soon? Why the prayers were never answered? Why kindness wasn't always enough? It was the darkness born of unanswered questions. And she wasn't here to fight it. She was here to see it. You miss him? She whispered. My papa. You miss every soul that left. The shadow pulsed. Not in rage, but in surprise. You're not evil, she said. You're just all the pain that no one wants to feel. The shadow shifted around her, like a storm curling inward, and deep within its heart. She saw something. A face. Familiar. A man. Hunched over a diary. His hand shaking. His voice soft. I'm sorry, Meera. He sighed. I didn't mean to leave. And just like that, she began to cry, not out of sadness, but relief, because in the darkest place she had ever been, she found the thing people searched for their entire lives. Not answers, but honesty. Raw, painful, sacred truth. You didn't leave, she whispered. You waited? Her locket, still around her neck, began to glow again, not with light, but warmth. And slowly, gently, the shadow began to lift, not vanish, but loosen its grip. Outside, Sundar felt the change. The roar faded. The sky above the chamber brightened again. And then she stepped out. Meera, untouched, glowing not with light, but presence. She walked back to Sundar and took his hand. And the shadow. It didn't flee. It bowed. Folded into itself like night falling into sleep. And was gone. Sundar stared at her, unable to speak. The figure of light reappeared, brighter now. Steadier. It spoke once more. You have remembered what the world forgets. That even grief is holy. Even pain has voice. Meera nodded. But it's not God. No. The voice agreed. It's the place where God listens. The ground beneath them began to shift. Not crack or tremble, but rise. The chamber lifted them like a cradle. Stone unfolding above. Sky returning? The temple was bringing them back. They had passed through something few ever did. And they were no longer the same. As the light faded and the air returned, Sundar looked at Meera and whispered, What did you see? She squeezed his hand. I saw that God never stopped listening. We just stopped being quiet enough to hear. But as they stepped out into the open, they saw the soldiers again. And this time, they were not alone. Behind them, a row of dark vehicles. Man in a white uniform stepped forward. And said, coldly, Mr. Pichai, we need to talk. You've seen something you were never meant to see. Asterisk, what remains when the light fades. Air had changed. As Sundar and Meera stepped out of the ruined temple, their feet touching the moss-covered earth of the forest floor once again. It felt as though they had returned to a different world. The light was the same, the sky above untouched by the storm they had just passed through. But everything around them seemed quieter, heavier, like the trees themselves knew what had just happened. Beneath their roots. And waiting for them was power, not the sacred kind,